Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Career Focus on the Success Insight podcast. Career Focus supports individuals who are pursuing careers that tap into their skills and passion and introduces you to entrepreneurs and companies that are helping to make that dream a reality. Our guest today is David Alexander. Now, Dave is a senior procurement specialist who recently navigated a career transition, and he has been gracious to accept our invitation to come on to Career Focus to chat about this journey. Dave, welcome to Career Focus on the Success Insight podcast.
Well, thank you, Howard, and I'm happy to be here and share whatever I can.
Fantastic. And for our listeners, in the spirit of full disclosure, David was actually a client of mine that I worked with this year to supporting him through his career transition. And as we were working together, there was a number of insights and through our conversations that I really thought our listeners who are still, struggling today, they're still in transition, or perhaps there's some instability in their particular area of the job market, that I thought Dave would really be an excellent guest to come on and share some of his insights into what it means to be in career transition, and also to successfully come out the end of that episode in a much better place. So once again, Dave, welcome. And how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Howard. It's been a really interesting journey over my career in these last, say, 24 months or so with, the whole COVID issue and the shutting down of the economy. And I'm sure like myself, as well as millions of other people, it's had a pretty significant impact on our lives, some a lot more than others, and myself. Again, I've been in purchasing and supply chain all of my career, and I found myself on the career transition phase of my work.
Now, in the procurement and the purchasing, is there a particular industry that you had been focusing on, or is it industry agnostic? You purchase products, services, you find the right vendors, and you bring them together for whatever company you're working for, or was there a specific industry?
So I guess it's like a friend of mine, a former colleague, said, bubblegum to battleships. What do you want to buy? We're in procurement and purchasing. We can do it. Early on in my career, when I first was getting started, I was actually going to night school, and I took a job as a warehouse assistant and shipping and stuff. And that actually kind of parlayed me into the procurement world. And this was on the oil and gas exploration industry. And over the years, this was, I'm really dating myself here. This was in the early 80s, and the oil and gas industry took a very sizable downturn. And I actually worked in the oil and gas industry for a period of time. But because we did some other things at the companies I worked with, we actually did some manufacturing on site, as well as electronics manufacturing. I was able to parlay that experience and shift to a whole new industry of essentially semiconductor manufacturing support industries, of building capital equipment for semiconductor companies such as Intel, your very large semiconductor companies. And so that's kind of overall my career. I've worked in the electronics side manufacturing, then the whole energy piece, the oil and gas.
Okay. Now, you and I first met in the early part of 2020, or is it 2021? I'm like losing actually, it was this year. We worked this year together.
Yes, it was probably around the March timeframe.
Okay. When did the market for you start to change, that you realized there's some changes coming on the horizon and I may be affected by it?
Very good question, Howard. And so being in the oil and gas industry for as long as I have been, this is a very cyclical business. It's up, it's down, it's up, it's down. I actually worked in what's called the EPC industry, engineering, procurement, and construction. These are large engineering firms that do large industrial scale projects. They will do petrochemicals facilities, they will do refineries, and they do a lot of different things. And these are very large contractors, so to speak. And when there's lots of work, they hire lots of people. And when there's not so much work, they really like to downsize and they do it quickly. And so my last year I was working in the EPC industry, and I was actually assigned to a project. And so when you in the EPC industry, when you have a project to work on, you're usually in pretty good shape. Once that project ends, if there's not something for you to move on to, you will typically get put on leave of absence, you may get laid off, or whatever they want to call it. And so I was on a project last year and had an assigned number of hours to work on this project. And it basically ran down in about October of last year. And with the large downturn across American industry, a lot of these projects, major capital expenditures had gotten pushed out and canceled or postponed. And so I very well knew that I could very, easily become a fatality of this, so to speak. And so I had been preparing for this in my mind, emotionally and professionally, of starting to planning on, working my network and getting the resume updated and all the normal customary things that we would do as far as, something's going to happen. And so really start working that plan.
You brought up the magic word resume, and the fact that there was a little bit of an enlightenment that you knew things were happening and there was this possibility. How up to date had you been keeping your resume? And I know we'll talk about that, also LinkedIn, but how up to date were you with those, so that when you did have this transition, it was not like, oh my God, I haven't touched my resume in the last 20 years?
I would say my resume probably reflected about a 12 to 18 months time frame. So yeah, it was in lagging about 12 to 18 months of updates. And I think that's something important all of us should do, is always, update your resume, keep a log, keep a record of what you do at work, your accomplishments, your challenges, your wins, your failures. Keep a working record of that, because over time you may be in an interview somewhere down the line, and some of that reference would be very good to have and be able to use as part of your interview.
Okay. You mentioned too your network, and I would imagine in your industry, just given the nature of oil and gas, the semiconductors, you probably had a fairly significant size network. Would that?
Yes, that's correct, Howard. It didn't necessarily reflect it on my LinkedIn account because I didn't always accept multiple and hundreds of connections requests, and we can talk about that later. But yes, my network was very valuable to me, because being in the procurement industry, or the procurement and supply chain side, I have an immense amount of contact with sellers and salespeople and those connections. And many of those people are calling on companies that I was interested in possibly applying for or interviewing with. And you can really parlay that kind of information into some intelligence in an inner look at the company you may be targeting, and that can be very helpful to you.
Okay. When the event occurred, however it came in, a phone call, an email, text message, and Dave, sorry to have to tell you this, but such and such date is going to be your last day of work. What did it feel like to kind of hear those words?
So I'll kind of back up a little bit. They actually notified me in November that I was actually on leave of absence, or furlough, whatever you want to call it. And so I was furloughed after my project ended in November. They let me know, hey, Dave, look, unfortunately, the planned capital projects we had for 2021 do not look like they're going to come through. And we're going to, lay you off essentially in the January timeframe. Yeah, so emotionally wise, it's, you prepare yourself for these things mentally over the years, what's going to happen, et cetera. I was disappointed, to say the least. Not surprised though, because I had anticipated it likely to happen. And so, you kind of, you build up around that as like, okay, this is eventually going to happen. And when you have a pretty good idea that this is going to happen, it really accelerates the other phase of your transition work and moving forward and what's next in your life for you and what do you want to do. Fortunately, I was at a situation where I could have done a different number of different things. Could have retired if I wanted to. Now, again, that would have been a different retirement that I had planned, but I still could have technically retired. But I'm not the type of person that would want to, retire. And I'll be honest, I'm 62 and I still have a lot of energy and I'm very active and I plan on doing a lot of things going forward. And working was part of it, regardless of actually where I worked. And it just fortunately worked out with me that I was able to secure this new position.
Fantastic. One quick question about your prior life before this last company. Had you been laid off before, or is this was a new experience for you?
So it's really interesting. I was laid off one time in 1993. And again, I was working in the oil and gas industry. It was a situation where we saw the work was coming down again. And I was actually here in Houston, and I had anticipated there was a very good possibility I would get laid off. And again, things just really worked out well for me with that, is because I had started preparing myself that I was very likely could get laid off. My colleagues said, Dave, that's never going to happen. They think too much of you. And I said, all bets are off in business, guys. And so I had actually already started working on my resume, and I had actually had some interviews in anticipation this was going to happen. And I was very fortunate because I had planned and I had just thought this was going to happen. I actually had my second interview with a company the day after I was laid off from this other company. And I was out of work for exactly 2 weeks, and I was able to join this other company within 2 weeks. And so it was just absolutely just incredible that I was just so fortunate to move immediately into another role.
That's great. That's great. Now, when the layoff occurred, it was official, January timeframe, the new year. What were your first steps that you began to take to kind of prepare you for this, looking for a new job? It's a job. Okay.
It absolutely is. And it takes time and it takes a lot of effort. It really, truly does. It can't be something that you go, well, I'm going to work on it tomorrow. I'm going to work on it this day. I mean, I got pretty regimented with what I did. I would spend 5 to 6 hours a day working on this, whether it's networking, where it's touching base with folks, doing searches, LinkedIn, looking for opportunities, really just kind of putting out all of my feelers and being very proactive with it. And so that's the process that I went through. I was fortunate enough to have access to the LHH program a little bit later. That was extremely beneficial to me because of the level of guidance you could provide from your organization. Again, very helpful to me. But no, as far as the job search, it takes time and it takes effort, and you really have to be dedicated about it, and you have to treat it like a job.
Great. No, I think that's wonderful insight, and everybody should, take that at face value and as they move forward, think about that. You have to commit. When you were going through the transition, and either before or during your program with LHH, how important was your existing network, and how did you engage them in this process of landing the next opportunity?
Oh, it was extremely important to me, Howard, because again, as I had mentioned, I know a lot of former colleagues that were with different companies. I was reaching out to them, of course, and some of these folks had previously worked for me in my manager roles. And they're like, Dave, yeah, if anything comes up, we're going to keep you in mind. And I also reached out to all the folks I know on the sales and marketing side, relationships I've developed with folks over 20, 25 years. I've known these guys, many of these people, for a number of years. I would reach out to them as well. And actually, when I was going into an interview, I reached out to one of an associate that I knew with a company, because his connection was one of the people that I was interviewing with. And I just, asked for insights. How do they do their business? How do they manage their supply organization? What's it like, to do business with them? What's your view of the culture over there, the company? What do you think of their level of work? And so I really try to utilize that network because you can really gain a lot of good intelligence.
That's great. And did you feel in any way that even with this network, even with this preparation that had been underway, that age may have or could have been a factor? Because you and I we're within a couple of years of each other. And I hear others where they feel, at least in their head, they didn't get it because they're in their 50s, early 60s. Did you feel in any way that way?
I personally think so. I actually interviewed with one company that I certainly was qualified for. I think just myself, they probably, chose a newer model, so to speak.
Okay.
But, I would just, I would just suggest and counsel everyone that's kind of in this age group as me, is that, be active and be very, what's the word I'm looking for here? Just again, be active and dress appropriately. The other piece of this is the interviewing side, is that you really need to rehearse your interviews. You really need to understand the behavioral questions that you're going to get asked. You need to, show a very high energy level when you're interviewing, and obviously present yourself accordingly. That doesn't mean you have to go out and buy a brand new suit or whatever, but make sure your wardrobe is updated. You're not wearing a tie from 1962, as I like to say, if you're wearing a tie at an interview. But it's certainly a factor. But I also think the flip side of that is that experience and that level of skills, many companies are looking for, and that was probably the determining factor why the company I'm with now brought me on, because of my level of experience, because of my level of skills, because they have a lot of junior folks in their organization, and they looked at me to help bring that piece of experience and knowledge on board.
It starts to raise this point about again, you've mentioned it a minute ago, the behavioral interview, but how did your experience, your skills help you and inform how you answered your interview questions? I mean, because so much in the past I do this, I do this, I do this. Okay. And it's the way the resume was. It's the way LinkedIn is. Today, it's more story oriented and sharing, the issues, the objectives, the actions, the results. So how did that experience that you have help inform you and the interview process, for example, for this new company you're working for?
Oh, Howard, I think absolutely it made the difference for them to select me as the end candidate, of saying, tell us about the time, Dave. Tell us about the time you made a mistake and what did you do about it? Having those experiences and being able to relay that back to them and put it in a terms that they can understand as to how their organization is working. That is a real key piece of it. It's not like, well, I did this, 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 and this. I think it's really important that you be able to tell the story of what actions you took, what skills you bring, and how you utilize that skills and knowledge in those type of situations or those behavioral questions.
How did you practice for the interview? Now, you and I had a couple conversations and you posed some questions to me and we talked about it. How did you, in addition to that conversation, prepare yourself for these interviews?
I actually had some former colleagues that are friends of mine, and they sat down across the table from me and we did mock interviews together in person. Fortunate enough to have these level of friends with the skill set, and they were in the industry I was in, and they basically, they pulled no punches. They just said, Dave, we're going to interview like we'd interview anybody else. Howard, and I told him, that's exactly what I want you to do. Put the drills to me, guys. This is my sea trials right here, so to speak. When I get on the firing line, I need to be able to answer these questions.
I love it. I love it. Let's circle back to the resume for a minute, because from my experience over the years, and probably for yours, the resume looks a little bit different these days. How did you update that resume so it's more than just ticking off boxes to telling a story via the resume?
Well, certainly the whole front end of the resume, the branding statement of who you are, what you do, and the kind of person that you are and the kind of work that you do, that's a really, really big piece of it. And then as you move into these, what are your skills, highlighting those areas of skills. And again, a resume is a living document. It needs to be modified anytime you're going out to interview with a company that has certain criteria or skills that they're looking for. Your resume should be modified to reflect those skills that those companies are looking for. And then as you're moving down through the resume, the companies that I worked for formerly, it's basically a very short description of what I did, but then moving quickly into multiple points of accomplishments and things that you've done that you did prior with those companies, is to show what value you brought.
Were references a part of the resume process? And it used to be in the prior days, we'd say references, provided upon request. We don't typically see that anymore. Did you have to offer references to this new employer?
No, actually, in this case, I did not. They did not ask for references. I obviously had my list readily available, but they went through a background check process. A company called Hire Right, I think is what it is. And this company goes out and contacts your former employers. But no, I didn't have to use any references, but I have previously where, I've used references and they've called references and asked for, their thoughts about me. And I would caution anyone, if you're going to use a reference, that you preempt any use of a reference by phone call with that individual and say, hey, you okay if I use you as a reference? And this is what I'm doing, and this is who might be calling you. And obviously make sure they're going to give you a good reference.
That's great advice. That's great advice. How did you use LinkedIn to support the job search?
LinkedIn was very, very useful to me. I mean, along with just the open jobs and stuff that you can get from LinkedIn, there's a lot of industry information out there that's available. You can drill down multiple levels into organizations and you can cross-reference it. For the job that I landed, I actually looked at the person who was interviewing me. I looked at their LinkedIn profile. And again, I had referenced previously that they had the same connection that I had. But I also picked up some little tidbits of information that this person commented on their LinkedIn. And so I kind of used that in my interview when they're saying, well, okay, tell us about what happened, where are you at now? And I explained to them that I got laid off last year at the company. And I took that little nugget of information and I said, last year we went into this full lockdown and it was just devastating for the economy. And a lot of really good people got shown the door. And so that's kind of how I use that LinkedIn connection. Again, this is nothing political or anything about that. It was just a statement that, oh yes, and I acknowledged in a way that comment by the person that says, oh yeah, the lockdowns were devastating. And I figured as long as this was going to go, I was probably going to get laid off. And I was, I was looking at the person interviewing me that made the statement when I said it to get that connection. And so those are the little nuances that you can really pick up, and you have to just be careful and diligent about how you play them.
Sure. Now, before we chat about onboarding into this new role, I'm curious, travel quite a bit. You've got family elsewhere in the US and friends that you meet, but how did you take care of yourself?
So that's a real question, Howard, because you're focused on the transition of your career. You're focused on making sure that you're bringing your best foot forward with all of the work you're doing with updating your resume and your networking and the amount of time and effort it's going to take doing this. It is very important to me, and I think it's important for most people, is to take some time away from that daily, regardless of what you like to do. Myself, I like to exercise. I like to be outside. Anything outside, I'm game with. But I think it's really important that you carve out that time for your emotional well-being. And physical activity for me really helps me relax. It helps put things into perspective. Another things I do is just, I one-on-one time, just me and myself, and relaxing and concentrating and thinking about, on and what can I do different. But keeping positive about it is that, I may have had a setback today, but there's more opportunities for me coming. And as I had mentioned earlier, this one company I interviewed with, I was certainly qualified for, but, it didn't work out. I said, well, that's okay, because as I'm moving forward through this, although I got a rejection here, I got a rejection there, nobody returned my call, I keep telling myself, I'm traveling through this and I'm getting closer to the goal. That's kind of my mindset, is that, I've had a million first dates, then I found the one, kind of a thing.
Was there some aspect of this process, as you look back, maybe even your career for that matter, that has surprised you along the way?
I guess I would have to say, Howard, that I think I've been pretty dang lucky. I think I've been pretty dang lucky. But at the same token, I think that I was foresighted enough to realize that in this day and time and the work in with corporate America, that you always have to plan and prepare for the unknown. Plan for the worst, hope for the best. And so I think that mindset, I've had this mindset for the last 20, 25 years. I'm always going to be on the lookout for things that are better opportunities for myself. And I think that's very important. That's really reflected on where I'm at currently in my career.
Very good. Thank you. As you were selected and formed, Dave, we want to hire you, bring you on to the company. We think you're going to be a great asset to us. How did you begin to prepare for that first day on the job? And really, you've been on the job for a little bit now. How are you continuing to go through that onboarding process, even as you're working?
Sure. So some of my early planning around this was putting together a plan of what I intend to accomplish the first 30, 60, 90 days. And LHH service was helpful with that, with giving some tips around that. But I wanted to understand the systems they used. They use SAP, they use these different systems. I wanted to make sure that even though I haven't used it in a while, that I re-honed my skills. I went out and I did some online free tutorials on SAP and purchase order management and stuff, refreshing my memory around that, doing more analysis about the company and talking to other individuals, and like the sales folks I referenced, asking them questions about it, trying to plan that work, and then sitting down and saying, okay, they've told me the things they're looking for. Let me walk in the door with, okay, see, there's some of the things you're looking for. This is what I kind of have planned. What do you think? And I actually took that to my supervisor, my manager, and she's like, Dave, welcome aboard. This is the office. Here's the bathrooms. Here's the coffee machine. Here's your laptop. Go ahead and get acclimated. And then within the next 24 hours after I got up to running speed, I went and sat down with her and I said, okay, so I've gotten access to all the stuff, and this is what I'm looking at right now. And where would you like me to start? And she says, well, you can kind of take the week off if you want. And I said, well, I kind of thought maybe I could start doing this, and this. And she says, oh, absolutely. And so I kind of had a plan in place of things that I wanted to bring forward. Now they could have easily modified that, but that would have been great. But that's really kind of how I planned it. And I felt like I really hit running.
Excellent. And how about the team? Your introduction to the team, getting to know them, their styles, they learning your styles, even with your manager, learning each other's style.
Yeah, I mean, the team is really, very, very welcoming to me. A lot of these folks don't have quite as much experience as me. And I brought myself into the team. They're like, well, they said, I got a lot of experience, et cetera. I said, look, we all have experience and skills. We all bring different things. There's things I can share with you, but there's a whole lot of things I know you can share with me. And I really worked hard and diligently to become part of the team and join the team and contribute and cooperate with the team immediately. And I feel like I've been really well received by the group. I asked for their help, and they've been extremely helpful to me. They're volunteering information. Oh, hey, Dave, by the way, when you go in there, you need to do it this way. I'm like, oh, thank you so much. And they come to me and ask questions, or I make an observation. We were talking about a certain purchase order or whatever. And instead of just being the new guys saying like, oh, that's not how we did it before, that's one thing I would never say. I said, have you thought about, could I suggest maybe you consider just kind of offering that, not like coming across as too strong, because you certainly want to build the cohesiveness of the team. And collaboration is everything. The communication and the collaboration as a group and working closely together. It's really been important to me. And as far as my manager, I mean, she's absolutely wonderful person, really, really nice lady, has been very welcoming to me, very appreciative of me. She's just a real gem. I got to tell you, she's just an absolute gem. And she has the experience I have, and she's helping me, further develop the organization. And I kind of told her early on, she says, Dave, hope we can give you some more opportunities as we move forward. And I told her, I said, look, Joyce, I said, I'm happy being a good Indian. I really am. I want to be here to support the organization. And so that's truly how I feel.
That's fantastic. Dave, before we head out today, any final insights that you would share with our audience, especially those who are in transition, about your journey, some lessons learned, or God, I wish I had done something a little bit different? Any final thoughts on what might be?
Well, I would just reiterate that stay positive. It's tough out there. It's easy to feel depressed about it. Take that time away to do something that relaxes and gives you some mental relief. Same time, you have to treat this like a job. You need to continue to push, working to find your next position. But take that time to relax and take a step back and say, stay positive about it. And certainly, as in the interviews, to me, the resume was going to get you noticed. Getting that interview and nailing the interview is absolutely the most important aspect of it. Do your homework on that. Learn as much as you can about the companies you're going to be interviewing with. Do the networking piece. Try to find any tidbits of insights about the company, and prepare yourself with the questions. There's numerous resources out there on the web. I found a list of 100 most commonly asked interview questions, and I went through every one of those. And some of them you're going to know right off the top of your head, but they're going to ask you the tough ones. What did you do in this situation? Be able to answer that in how you did it somewhere else, formerly in your work role. Parlay that into what you did previously. Show that organization that this is what I can bring, and this is because I've done this before.
Oh, I love that. I love it. And, as you were sharing this insight, it brought to mind a question that typically gets asked, and I'm curious how you, if you've been asked it and how you responded in an interview. Oftentimes the team who's doing the interview, the hiring manager, do you have any questions? How did you respond to that?
Oh, I had my list of questions of just say, I'm going to call them, for lack of a better term, throw down questions. These are ones I know I'm going to back up and ask. But it was fortunate because the discussions went on long enough. I asked a very specific questions to one of the who I didn't think necessarily, I didn't know what he was about. I felt positive about some of them, but some other ones I was like, so I'm not really sure how he feels about me. But I asked him a very specific question related to the kind of work he did. And I think that got through to him as like, oh, wow, this guy really does know what he's doing if he asked me that kind of question. But I think it's really important that you have some questions. And you can also develop these in the interview process. If they ask you, they make a statement about, well, this is kind of how we did it. You could kind of turn that into a question on the backside of saying, well, I know this is how you explained how you're doing this currently. Have you considered doing it this way to just show that you're thinking outside the box, that you're trying to be proactive about it?
Oh, I love it. Thank you. Dave, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, and I know you are incredibly gracious and have offered on numerous occasions to be a voice, a sounding board to others, and how would they go about doing that?
Oh, they can reach me through LinkedIn if they wish to, Howard. I'd be happy to collaborate with anyone. And again, we're all in this journey together. This is unprecedented times, what we've gone through in the last 18 to 24 months. And I know for myself, I've had colleagues out there that were on the bench just like me. We've shared information. And actually, this is really a strange situation. Former colleague of mine who I think a lot of, him and I were interviewing for the very same job. We were both touched by a recruiter. And him and I shared information in advance. Say, hey, this is who I'm interviewing with. Well, so am I. Okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. Well, this is what I'm going to do. We had this, this agreement. It's like, if I don't get it, I hope you get it, or somebody we know gets it. And so we actually shared that information. And I even told the recruiter about it. And he's like, what? He says, I've been doing this for 30 years. I have never had individuals do this. I'm like, well, that's kind of how we roll. That's really how I believe, is that if I can help somebody, I'm more than happy to do it.
I love that, being of service to others. And, as you said, I mean, these are unprecedented times, the nature of your industry, COVID in 2020, 2021, and we have to support each other. We are, for the sake of a better word, all in the same boat, and the boat rises when the tide comes in. We should all be on it.
Well said, sir. Well said.
David, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on Career Focus on the Success Insight. Some wonderful insights. I loved hearing your story. And again, I'm incredibly grateful and that you were willing to take the time to be on the show and, to share this episode with whoever you'd like. I know I'm going to be doing that, but again, it's been a pleasure to get to know you, work with you, and a pleasure to have you on Career Focus. Thank you.
Howard, thank you so much. And it's been an absolute pleasure myself working with you, and look forward to continuing our dialogue well into our future.
You got it. You got it. All right, folks, we have just been chatting with David Alexander. He's a senior procurement specialist. This episode is Career Focus on the Success Insight. And Dave has really shared, his journey navigating the career transition, everything from preparing for an event like this. And he saw the tea leaves, the writing on the wall, so to speak. And then when the transition occurred, he hit the ground running, pursued this like any other job, and also along the way, taking his family as well as, he shared a lot of insights, not only in the resume, the LinkedIn, the power of networking, as well as preparing for the interview, and especially those behavioral interviews, and practice. And really the fortunate aspect is he had a network that he could call upon to assist him, much like he would assist them in their career transition journey. They assisted him as well during practicing of the interview. So really just a wonderful story about his journey, and the power of having a plan as you're navigating this career transition. We hope you enjoyed today's episode with Dave on the Career Focus on the Success Insight podcast. We definitely want to hear your feedback. You can find us on our Success Insight podcast page, as well as on our pages on LinkedIn and on Facebook, Success Insight Podcast. We're also on the major podcasting platforms, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. We're also on Audible. You can find us on iHeartRadio, Pandora, and especially Spotify, where we have organized all of our Career Focus episodes onto a playlist. So multiple opportunities to hear this great content today with Dave, as well as any of our other Career Focus episodes, as well as the entire 280 some episodes in our library. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. Wear your mask if it's appropriate, practice social distancing if it's appropriate, but above all, take care of yourselves, your family, and the community. And we'll see you on another episode of Career Focus on the Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.